if I am on your For You page, I am willing to bet that one of two things is true. Either you know a lot about strikes and protests and I'm about to be preaching to the choir, or you know a lot about strikes and protests because you were really into Newsies for a while. But, this is a really important thing to know, Newsies takes place in 1899, and crucially, while Newsies is very much about a legitimate and important collective bargaining agreement, Newsies also takes place after the most pivotal union event of the 1890s had already set labor union momentum into motion, and before what I consider actually the most important union event of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, which is in 1902. So, what happened in the early and mid-1890s? The Pullman Rail Strike. The Pullman Strike was one of the first examples of successful collective bargaining in American history, which is interesting because in a lot of ways technically it failed, but partially because the workers who went on strike were also actively demanding better terms for the workers whose circumstances did not allow them to strike. They were demanding better for all, not just better for those who were able to walk the line. But here's the thing. Up until this point, the United States government had played the role of strikebreaker, not peacemaker. Not siding with labor, not siding with the people. The government was, up until this point, on the side of the corporations, because the big companies were making the railroads, and they were mining the sources of energy, and they were putting out information to the public via newspapers. And those are all services that the government needed, plus they needed money from the robber barons who owned those companies, who were dumping vast amounts of wealth into government stuff as well as public services so that the government would be nice to them when tax time came. The Pullman Rail Strike was no exception. President Grover Cleveland sent soldiers to break up the protests, and it had potential to get super violent before the strikers backed down. But the government and the corporations also listened to the workers, maybe for the first time, and one rebellion builds on the next. The Pullman Strike laid the groundwork for the Coal Strike of 1902, which effectively facilitated the turn of the United States government from strikebreaker to peacemaker in industrial disputes, which was a first for the post-Civil War United States and arguably a first for the United States in general. Through the coal strike, workers became human in the eyes of the government, not just numbers and machines, and the United States government became, perhaps for the first time, representatives of the common people rather than of private interests of high-dollar corporations. That change is what led to the formation of unions across the country, as well as collective action movements across the spectrum of laborers. And yeah, Newsies takes place right in between those two things happening, because it's 1899. That's right between 1894 and 1902, so we're seeing some of that change in motion. So, what can we learn from this? Mostly that collective bargaining relies on collective action, and that the United States government had to be pushed over the course of a significant amount of time to be a force supporting the people rather than the corporations. It wasn't and never has been the natural inclination of the government to support the people unless the people demand it. So that's your union history for the day. I can do a separate video on the historical accuracy of Newsies if you want, or we can talk about coal mining some more, especially in the context of company towns and environmental impact and environmental destruction. Just let me know if that's something you want to see.